The movie opens in Transylvania in 1893, where solicitor Thomas Renfield's traveling from London with two of the local peasants. With the winding roads making Renfield nauseous, the peasant tells the coach driver to slow it down, until noticing how late it's getting and demanding they go even faster. Renfield asks himself, but the driver ignores him and continues the same thrashing pace. Arriving at the closest town, Renfield tumbles out the door onto his head. The driver then throws his luggage down as he'll go no further tonight, but Renfield has an appointment with the Count Dracula. The disturbed innkeeper warns him of the vampires residing in Castle Dracula, but the Englishman just believes them to be silly superstitions. A local gypsy woman, Madame Ouspenskaya, tells him to take a cross for protection and smacks him when he refuses it, and then charges him $15 when he accepts it. Forced to walk to his appointment, he reaches Dracula's decrepit castle by nightfall and the doors swing open automatically, then slam closed behind him. With a shadow that has a mind of its own, Renfield's greeted by the client he's come to meet, Count Dracula. Claiming the bats infesting the castle are his children of the night, he slips in its crap, tumbling down the stairs, but springs up magically unharmed, though his shadow hobbles after them, having taken all the damage. On the way to the study, Dracula walks through a giant spider web like he's a T-1000, so Renfield attempts to follow but gets himself wrapped up pretty badly. He's still pulling cobwebs off as Dracula removes his headpiece and places it on its hanger. The Count's intent is to buy a property called Carfax Abbey in England, which Renfield signs over, willingly inviting the vampire into London. Suddenly Renfield gets a paper cut, sending blood spurting all over the documents and himself, as the vampire exposes his appetite with his lip licking. Spending the night in the castle, Renfield is visited by two of Dracula's brides who glide into the room and begin grinding on the furniture.
What are you doing to the furniture?
He wakes up and the two vampires leap on him, and after first resisting temptation, he gives in. Dracula sees what they're doing and scorns the lesser vampires, telling them to cut it out with the gliding, so they both waddle away. Thinking he just had a wonderful dream, Renfield falls asleep the moment Dracula attempts to hypnotize him, so he's slapped back awake. After doing this again, Dracula shakes Renfield awake, finally getting him under his control, making the mortal his lifelong familiar.
Yes, master.
He's tasked with looking after Dracula's coffin as they travel by sea to England on board the Demeter. Renfield tries to stop it from being thrown about the cabin, but it's easier said than done as the ship sails through a storm. When Dracula emerges pissed off, he begins his infamous slaughter of the doomed crew, leaving Renfield the only survivor to be found by authorities and locked up as a madman. That night, the sanitarium's Dr. Seward meets his daughter Mina and her fiancé Jonathan Harker at the theater. Dracula hypnotizes an usher to call the doctor away from the others, but he tells the woman to also forget their conversation, so she just stands there blankly. Angry and refusing the woman a tip.
No tip?
That you remember.
Dracula enters the box himself to make the introductions, when the usher returns in a trance and relays the original message, calling the doctor away.
Dracula.
Harker makes the formal introductions when Dracula takes a specific interest in Dr. Seward's assistant Lucy, who's charmed with the Count despite the rest of them getting a bad feeling from him.
Thank you.
Later that same night, Lucy looks out her window at Carfax Abbey and sees Dracula looking back, so she begins to undress flirtatiously. As she gets into bed, Dracula morphs into a bat and flies over to her window, but she closes it and he flies into it head first. After regaining his equilibrium and entering the room, he's interrupted in his attack by the two fellas who heard a noise from outside. Having been clinging to the roof above them, the doors slammed closed and Dracula crashes down to the ground just as Lucy goes back to sleep, and Dracula can finally begin to drink his victim's blood. The next day at Seward's sanitarium, Renfield's being tormented by one of the guards when the caretaker Martin enters to bring him before the doctor. Seward's having lunch when Renfield joins him and at first acts like a proper English gentleman, then stuffs a small insect into his mouth. The doctor calls him out on it, but he claims it was just a fallen raisin, then snatches a spider from the air and eats it. Using a dropped fork as an excuse to go to the ground, Renfield then eats a grasshopper, and when Seward points out that it's still kicking for its life, the hunger for life completely overtakes Renfield and he begins swiping at flies, getting him thrown right back inside. That same morning, Mina visits Lucy to find she looks pale and sickly, so she gets her father to check on her. Speculating on what could have caused the wounds on her neck, Seward suggests to the Harkers that they contact an obscure disease expert to shed some light. At the London hospital, a Dr. Abraham Van Helsing is giving a lecture during one of his autopsies. While dissecting the body, his students begin passing out as he rips the organs out and passes them around between them, leaving only the proud Woodridge standing, until Abe cracks the skull open, hands him the brain and puts him down with the rest. Afterwards, a nurse enters and congratulates the doctor on a clean sweep and informs him of Seward's emergency.
An emergency?
Waking up in the middle of the day, Dracula isn't affected by the sunlight and believes Lucy's blood to have cured his vampirism. He goes for a stroll in the park and enjoys some picnic goers' wine and chicken, when Renfield rushes over looking concerned and he suddenly begins smoking. The Count starts running on the spot, not advancing, but wakes up in his coffin having just been having a daymare. After examining Lucy's neck, Abe concludes that she's been bitten by a creature of the night and that it will return to finish her off. He consults the book Nosferatu and comes up with the plan to completely smother Lucy's room in garlic to repel the vampire. That night Dracula rises after forgetting to move the chandelier and breaks in through Lucy's window, but getting a smell of the room he instantly runs away disgusted. He visits Renfield's cell to free his servant with the task of removing the garlic. After trying to speak eye to eye with his master and nearly breaking his neck, Dracula bends the bars back, allowing Renfield to join him in freedom, but the moron leaps from the window, nearly crippling himself but escaping with only a minor limp. Once he sneaks into Lucy's bedroom, he begins collecting wreaths of garlic when deciding to look under her blankets. Lucy wakes up and catches him, alerting Seward and Harker with her screams. The doctor orders Martin to drag Renfield back to his cell at the sanitarium, where he claims to have seen everything Lucy has on offer. When she's finally alone again, Dracula uses his vampire hypnosis to just have her come to him instead. Mina steps out onto the terrace shortly after and sees Lucy being fed on by a cloaked figure, but they all arrive too late, finding the doctor's assistant already drained dry. After the funeral, Van Helsing warns the others that they must drive a stake into Lucy's heart or she will rise from the grave. Seward refuses, still not believing the supernatural theory, exclaiming that who on earth could possibly be a vampire, when coincidentally Dracula enters to give his condolences for Lucy. He meets Professor Van Helsing for the first time, and is asked by him his relationship to the famous Vlad Dracula who would impale peasants on spikes. Being one and the same person, the Count just says that they had it coming. On the Count's way out, they begin to go back and forth trying to get the last word in, with Dracula winning with an insult thrown at Van Helsing through an open window. The professor notices that he never gives up and suspects him to be the vampire, though he must find a way to prove it. After they lay Lucy's body to rest, a man suddenly begins to hear cries coming from the coffin. He opens it to find her still alive, but she attacks him and drinks him dry, leaving Van Helsing to stumble upon the body. With Seward still believing it all to be poppycock, Harker goes alone to check out Lucy's grave just in case. While waiting for the professor, he's approached by a vampiric Lucy, now one of Dracula's brides, and attempting to seduce him, but he's too British to give in to the temptation, so she tries to bite him. Van Helsing chases her away with a cross and back into her crypt, where the two hunters enter to find Lucy now lying motionless in her coffin. He gives Harker the task of driving a stake into her heart, saying that it must be done by someone who loved her, but Harker insists he only liked her, so the professor says close enough. With the only other option being to cut off her head, stuff it with garlic and rip her ears off, he agrees to do it. The professor retreats behind a pillar as Harker releases a fountain of blood covering himself and the entire crypt, but when it's all over he's handed a single tissue to clean himself off with by the caring professor. When they return to Seward, he's finally convinced that Lucy was a vampire by the rookie's blood-soaked appearance, which Van Helsing says he avoided himself with his years of experience. From outside Mina's room, the Count hypnotizes the maid Essie to fall asleep and begins to attract his new bride-to-be. After going through the wrong door and into the closet, then tripping over a stool when she comes out, Dracula orders Mina to stand up, but the two hypnotized women get their wires crossed. They simultaneously follow his commands until they crash into each other. So Dracula just goes in himself, and after first mistakenly collecting the wrong woman, he returns for his prize and flees. Back at the Abbey, he brings Mina downstairs and starts an old organ to accompany them as they dance, during which Dracula's shadow gets a little carried away, forcing it to be told off by the Count. They finally conclude the dance with Dracula biting Mina, and it fades to black.
No hickeys.
The next morning, Mina's already back home and awake when Harker comes to visit. Essie is only just now waking up, saying that she felt a dark cloud come over her during the night, then walks away like someone dropped her on her back. Mina begins to make her own prudish fiancé uncomfortable as she begins behaving like a different woman. Harker begs her to know what he can do to help, so she makes him grope her when her father comes in, getting angry at the sight as they've only been engaged for a short 5 years. Hearing the commotion, Van Helsing comes in and seeing the lovely new scarf Mina has, he rips it away to reveal the vampire's bite. As further proof, he places a cross in her hand, causing her to scream and pass out, leaving a burn. With them all finally in agreement that they must find the identity of the vampire, Van Helsing comes up with a plan. They hold a ball inviting all of the townspeople, including Dracula, and even allow Renfield to attend. The Count passes his hat to an attendant and approaches Mina to ask for a dance, hypnotizing her current acquaintance to throw his drink in his own face. When the two begin to cut a rug, Martin's given the signal to drop the curtain to a mirror reflecting Mina dancing by herself and Dracula the vampire. Thinking everyone's staring because they're such great dancers, they put on an even bigger show, getting a bigger reaction from the crowd. When the dance ends, Dracula sees the mirror and acknowledges Van Helsing's intelligence before throwing a table into it. He snatches Mina up and leaps through a window into the night, attempting to be followed by Renfield, who gives himself away as the vampire's servant by yelling out "Master, Master" over and over.
I mean, Mister!
With little time for the three to find Mina, and with Dracula having moved his coffin away from Carfax Abbey, Renfield, after only just being thrown in the sanitarium, is released once again under the guise of good behavior. After he runs around in a circle until he's convinced himself that he's lost any followers, he unknowingly leads the three directly to the abandoned chapel where Dracula's now holed up. When the master and servant hear the hunters approaching, Renfield begs Dracula to punish him for his failure, which he does by throwing him down the stairs for the entering hunters to trample over. As Dracula leans down to drink Mina dry behind a locked door, the father and fiancé attempt to bash the door down while Van Helsing just lends moral support. They break their way inside and begin their attack, but Harker's thrown into a wall and Seward taken out with a beam for the duration of the fight. During the battle, the Count's shadow abandons him, and when using a cross and stake, the hunters nearly defeat Dracula, but he destroys all their weapons. After getting poked in the eyes to release Harker, Dracula pins him and leans in to bite Mina once more. Having seen rays of sunshine beginning to enter through the sealed windows, the professor opens shutters allowing the morning sun to bask Dracula head to toe. Beginning to smoke, Dracula morphs into a bat and escapes into the rafters to recover. When Renfield pops his head in through a shingle, letting the sun in and turning the Count into a pile of bat-shaped ash. Waking from the curse, Mina's collected in Harker's arms and whisked away to wherever, passing Renfield, who enters to mournfully collect his master's ashes and set them down comfortably in his coffin.
You're starting to look like your old self again.
With Thomas Renfield now being his own man once again, he instantly calls Dr. Seward master and begins to serve him loyally, albeit stupidly. Last to leave the chapel is Abe, who shouts one last insult at his rival before exiting the room. And the movie ends.
No, not another enema! Yes, another and another! Until you come to your senses!
So you made it. I appreciate your time. I couldn't have done it without you. Tell your mother I said thanks.
Give him an enema. It'll give him a feeling of accomplishment.
Vampire?
Vampire? What are you saying?
I'm saying vampire.